Or broadcast on February 21st, track 1. When did the music fever attack Brian Wilson, the leader of the Beach Boys? Well, it might have been when he heard Lawrence Welk play a tune that his father had written. We'll be talking to Brian. And in the beginning, there was the dream of the father, Murray Wilson. And when you ask Brian Wilson about his father's influence on the Beach Boy brothers, he takes a deep breath and then cuts through obviously formidable mental barriers with a phalanx of words.
He had a lot of drive. You know, I picked up a lot of drive from my father, and like the Beach Boys' success kind of hinges on the fact that Murray Wilson was a spark plug kind of personality behind the group, you know. And what had happened was he'd written for Lawrence Welk a song called Two Step, Side Step. Two-step, side-step, I've been a whirl away, two-step, you know, and it was a cute little tune. Anyway, so my dad enjoyed moderate success as a songwriter, and then just somehow his personality rubbed off on Carl Dennis and I, you know, and we're sort of little spark plugs in our own right, too, you know what I mean? We kind of pick up that Murray Wilson spark.
But Murray Wilson was a tough taskmaster, in many ways a nearly tyrannical parent. Recent magazine articles have depicted Murray as a man swift to use his fists against any son who got out of line or who did not live up to his expectations.
Sometimes I would almost have to do something in order to do what, you know, I thought, you know, he'd like, you know, and all that stuff. And yeah, true. I found myself, you know, getting A's and B's and all that in school. And she said, hey, look, Dad, you know, he says, very good, son. You know, I mean, that kind of thing, wanting to accomplish something for him, you know, in high school. And like I had him come to my football games, you know, and I'd say, well, what'd you think of me? He says, you were sloughed off, you were lazy, you know. And I mean, I used to catch it from him all the time over that stuff. You know, don't slough off. Get in there and fight. You know, he just had that attitude, and I learned a lot from it.
Hey, take it away. Get that ball and fight.
What Brian Wilson learned was that hard work and excellence earned him and his brothers Murray Wilson's forbearance. Anything else is wrath.
He said, if you're going to do it good, you know. He didn't believe in halfway business, you know, and of course we learned that from him, and of course it's helped us out.
But in many ways, that compulsion to excel, instilled by Wilson père, may have made it impossible for Brian Wilson to function on any normal level. It is difficult to live a life which demands that you be better than you know you are. More on that when this interview continues later. This is Lou Irwin, Earth News Radio, for Clairol Herbal Essence. For broadcast on February 21st, track 2. You simply don't find many fathers guiding the careers of rock and roll singers. Murray Wilson was an exception. In every way, he was the guiding force behind the Beach Boys. That story after this for Clairol Herbal Essence. You are listening to the Beach Boys' first recording. When Brian Wilson and his brothers completed it, they brought it to their father, Murray, a would-be composer and musician himself, who in fact had once sold a song he had written to Lawrence Welk. Murray Wilson was a stern parental taskmaster who rewarded his sons for hard work with his approval and gave them the back of his hand for anything else. Brian recalls,
our first thing, surfing, he reacted very, when we did surfing, we did that on a mono tape. We all played it live. Nowadays, the Eagles and all the groups will record their background music first and then later overdub what they call the vocals on electronically onto the tape. We did it all live, our first single, and our mix wasn't as good. It wasn't as balanced. I mean, you couldn't hear the guitar playing as well. You didn't hear the bass notes as well. Some of the vocals were a little buried. It wasn't mixed and balanced properly, and my father was very highly critical of the first thing we did. He says, well, listen, look at this. You don't hear the guitar. You don't hear this. What is going on here? And he says, listen, I'm going to have to take over as a producer, which he did. He took over as producer.
The Beach Boys quickly became Murray Wilson's group. It had started out just as an after-school lark, fun and harmony between the brothers Wilson, their cousin Mike Love, and good friend Alan Jardine. But Murray realized their potential. All he had to do was whip them into shape.
There was a lot of this highly critical, you know, a very critical mind, so to speak, you know, and of course I learned from it. I learned to be highly critical myself, and I am, with myself, I'm very critical, self-critical with myself at this time, you know, because of that.
Did that criticism bother you then?
Oh, yeah, it bothered me, of course, because it made me feel like I was goofing up. It made me feel inferior. It made me feel worthless. And a number of emotions like that, but then, of course, I work on them on my own to try to overcome those fears, you know.
During all of the Beach Boys' good times, and most of their rough ones as well, Murray Wilson was there, keeping his boys in line, demanding from them almost superhuman efforts. Brian was always conscious of the need to please Murray.
3 years ago, he died, and we were all very heartbroken about it and felt very bad to lose him. And but he, of course, we had a relationship.
And some relationship it was. It was one that produced the most successful American musical group in the history of pop music, but which also was at the roots of devastating emotional problems for Brian Wilson. More on that when this interview continues tomorrow. This is Lou Irwin, Earth News Radio, for Clairol Herbaliscence. Broadcast on February 22nd, Track 1. How did it all start? When did the magic moment occur when singing and surfing became the Beach Boys? Well, Brian Wilson will be describing that moment after this for Clairol Herbaliscence. It had all started out innocently enough. Brian Wilson and his college friend Alan Jardine fooling around with a guitar and a few songs which they had composed. And while both of them had grown up near Southern California beach communities, neither was involved in that fledgling sport called surfing. But Brian had a brother who was.
See, my brother Dennis came up with the idea of doing surf music. And we followed in his concept to do a surf song, but we hadn't thought of that until he came up with that idea.
Surfing is the only life, the only way for me now, surf.
This was the Beach Boys' first effort. Not one of them, the Wilson brothers, their cousin Mike Love, or Jardine, had any thought of making the big time with their tune. It was just Dennis's idea transformed into music.
He just came over and said, look, everybody at school is talking about surf songs. Everybody at school is talking about surfing, and it's a big craze now. Why don't you write a song about surfing and we'll sing it at the school? That was the level that we were at, wanted to sing for a high school. And but eventually it became a national thing where we were involved in entertaining for lots of people.
Surfing is the only life, the only way.
Lots of people is a striking understatement. The Beach Boys became the most popular singing group in the world. It happened all at once. A few kids from middle-class homes suddenly finding themselves rich and famous. You'd think that such a success would have been positively thrilling for them, but for Brian Wilson, fame turned out to be a crucible. When you ask him how he reacted to it, his words pour out in a jumble.
That was frightening to me. It was most frightening because there was, a lot of challenges to overcome, and I became rich overnight, became very wealthy, and I didn't know how to handle that. I said, look, I have money now, and I didn't know really what to do. Although I don't need money, I could care less about money, as far as having to spend it, I could care really less about how rich I get as far as that goes. But I just feel that, that it was a challenge at first to handle it. It was a challenge to be able to handle the success that had come.
Brian Wilson seems to be saying that money isn't everything, but he is also implying much, much more. Brian never has been able to come to terms with his fame, never has really found the happiness in his music that he has afforded his audiences. For Brian Wilson, writing music is not something that he really likes to do. It is something that he has to do, and that may be at the root of the Beach Boys' troubles. We'll be talking to him after this. For Clairol. Beach Boys became instant pop heroes in 1962. Brian Wilson found himself spending virtually every waking moment turning out new songs, rehearsing them with the other members of the group, recording them, performing them. Every few months, another Beach Boys record would hit the top of the charts. January 1962, Surfin'. August 1962, Surfin' Safari. October 1962, 409. December 1962, 10 Little Indians. March 1963, Surfin' USA. April 1963, Shutdown. August 1963, Surfer Girl. The same month, Little Deuce Coupe. November 1963, Be True to Your School. The same month, In My Room. February 1964, I Get Around. May 1964, Don't Worry Baby, and so on. Not until the Beatles' invasion did the outpouring of hit tunes begin to ebb. Today, Brian Wilson recalls that work in those early days was, for him, a compulsion.
There was a lot of compulsion involved, that we did it out of just a compulsive drive that you see so many pressures happening at once, and you just grit your teeth and you flip out, more or less flip out.
But when Brian Wilson first flipped out back in those early days, the results seemed to be positive. Loads of cheerful, appealing tunes. But these days, Wilson recalls that he wrote that music in a state of unending anxiety.
There were a lot of pressures, and a lot of scenes were going down that bothered me, that I couldn't handle, that I couldn't quite understand or couldn't fathom. And it caused me to go into a state of panic, and creative panic, where you panic and you become very creative and you begin to use your creativity to give to people, you know.
And even while Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys were thrilling audiences, Brian himself was feeling little satisfaction. In the background was his father, manager, spurring him on to greater efforts, forever criticizing even his biggest hit tunes. And the criticism always seemed to hit home.
Something was lacking. That I felt the creativity, but there was something lacking. Something was wrong somewhere that was lacking, and it behooved me to achieve more perfection at creativity.
In the end, that insistent demand that Brian Wilson placed on himself to better his music became disabling. Faced with the inadequacies that he saw in himself, he retreated from his adoring audiences, and in the end, retreated even from himself. That story when this interview continues tomorrow. This is Lou Irwin, Earth News Radio, for Clairol Herbal Essence. A broadcast on February 23rd, Track 1. To you, the music of the Beach Boys may always have been fun, fun, fun. But to Brian Wilson, the leader of the group, it was anything but. We'll be talking to him after this for Clairol Herbal Essence. To the Beach Boys records in the early 60s must have presumed that the group was having nothing but fun, fun, fun. But when Brian Wilson, who created most of that music as the leader of the group and the writer of most of their music, when he heard those records, he reacted this way.
I usually cringed. I had a lot of cringing. I'd cringe at some of the falsettos. I think, I sang that, I did that, and it made me cringe because I realized where I was at that time, and I was in a very emotional place, very highly hung up, highly scared, very fearful of everything, and very, very, very withdrawn.
There were times when those withdrawn feelings were evident in Brian's music, but most of the time, the music was simply about good times, sun, surf, girls, and cars.
You see, when you're unhappy, it's like they say, smile even though you're crying, smile even though you're dying, da 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 da. You know, it's just it's an old concept, an entertainment concept, that you just keep an attitude of you're going to make others happy, even if you're a little hung up or a little bit unhappy within your own self. You know, like I could be suffering half the time and nobody would know it. You know, no one would know how much I would be going through. You know, but then of course I would maintain, like for instance, I'll go to hospitals and I'll cheer up the kids down there at the hospitals. You know, although inside, I'm not all that super happy, sometimes it's not all that rosy for me, and but although I do keep an attitude of we have a responsibility, I think, as people to keep each other in a good place. I think we do, and I maintain that philosophy. So like I say, smile even though your heart is breaking is so much the attitude the entertainers take on these days.
Everybody, it would seem, was getting off on the Beach Boys music back in the early 60s, except the man who was primarily responsible for its creation. For Brian Wilson, work was a responsibility. Happiness was a necessary pretense. The sun, surf, girls, and cars were as much illusions to him as they were to his audiences. It was no wonder, then, that he began to lose hold of reality. That story when this interview continues later. This is Lou Irwin, Earth News Radio, for Clairol Herbal Essence. For broadcast on February 23rd, Track 2. What was the real reason why Brian Wilson stopped touring with the Beach Boys in 1966? Well, you'll get that reason from Wilson himself. Some of the stories that have been written about his eccentricities, then you must conclude that Brian Wilson is the Howard Hughes of rock and roll. There are stories of how he had gone berserk on airplanes, how he had a sandbox built around his piano so that he could feel as if he were at the beach when he wrote his surfing music. But all you have to do is watch him sit through what is for him the ordeal of an interview, and you can easily conclude that the leader of the Beach Boys is torn up by emotional conflicts and is forever in search of some calm.
There's a constant battle, of course, in life, a constant battle to deal with everything, as it is, and like I say, I have had moments on planes, of course, when I was quite, quite, upset or, quite agitated or nervous. I should say nervous. I'm really basically a very neurotic person, and I have this neurosis. I call it a neurosis that I can't explain why. I am the way I am. I'm just a very nervous person.
His leg moves in a constant jitter as he talks. He rarely even glances at you. The interview for him is a trial, but so is the rest of Brian Wilson's public life. In 1966, he quit touring with the Beach Boys. The publicity stories released at the time said that he had stopped because of an ear ailment and because he wished to devote more time to composing. The real facts, according to Wilson today, are these.
Well, that was based on the fact that I had a what I would call a semi-nervous breakdown, or a breakdown of the emotions, to where I had reached a point where I couldn't handle anything, and I was too afraid to go on the road. And I was getting to the point where I said, well, look, I can't write songs on the road. I can't do anything for anybody. I can't grow. I can't expand. I feel like I'm boxed in a little box, that I can't, all that stuff. And it was like a feeling of being boxed in, and I just thought maybe if I would discontinue the touring, I might be able to station myself at a home, some house somewhere, and carry on there and do my work there,
But the plan really didn't work out.
I had a lot of tough years in the late, like after 1966, and when I had all these heavy things had happened to us, a lot of heavy karma that happened to us, and we learned. Well, I don't know. I just didn't seem to pull myself together.
In fact, Brian Wilson spent nearly 10 years as a recluse, virtually non-productive, certainly in comparison with his first 4 years of creativity. Only family ties held the Beach Boys together at all. Brian Wilson will be talking more about his period in limbo when this interview continues tomorrow. This is Lou Irwin, Earth News Radio, for Clairol Herbal-Essence. For broadcast on February 24th, Track 1. From 1966 to 1976, Brian Wilson seemed to live the life of an eccentric recluse, the Howard Hughes of rock and roll. And today, even he will admit that his life was just as bizarre as people were saying it was. In 1966, after 4 years of uninterrupted success, Brian Wilson abandoned the Beach Boys. He holed up in his home, rarely leaving his bed. He composed music not with his old friends, but with serious heads. Around the music business, stories about his eccentric behavior were related with much shaking of heads. Today, Brian says that he had retreated from public life in order to pull himself together. But he adds,
I was just too messed up mentally to do it, And
Do you know what, have you figured out yet what the cause of that was?
No, I haven't. I haven't been able to figure that out yet, no.
And Brian Wilson, teary-eyed, stares out into space. For nearly 10 years, he has tried to come to terms with himself, to understand his limits, to understand why the public has responded to him in the way that it has. In the late 60s, challenged by the Beatles and countless other groups who sophisticated pop music, Brian, holed up in his Bel Air home, tried to prove that he could be just as good or better than the lot of them. But in fits of frustration, he would tear up his compositions before they were completed. He even destroyed the entire tape of background music for a planned Beach Boys album.
I'd thrown that in the can because it was too weird. I had taken a lot of drugs, too many drugs, which I must say, as far as on radio, as far as a testimony against drugs, drugs are not happening with me. I have given up drugs for good.
No, these days, in his search for a kind of normalcy, Brian Wilson is into meditation, hypnosis, health food, and psychotherapy. And for whatever reason, he is coming around. Last year, he even came out of seclusion.
I think it was mostly my brothers who had come to me and said, look, we have obligations, you have to do this, you have to do that. We have obligations to people and to the company to continue our deal. And they said, it looks like you're copping out or you're giving up. And they just logically convinced me to get back into it, to get back into the scene,
Last year, the Beach Boys released a comeback album of moderate interest called 15 Big Ones. Now they are about to release a new album, which may be more satisfying, called The Beach Boys Love You. Brian Wilson will have more to say about his comeback, professionally and emotionally, when this interview with him continues later. What kept Brian Wilson almost unable to function for nearly 10 years? Well, the Beach Boys leader now admits Part of the answer is drugs. That story after this for Clairol Herbal Essence. In the late 60s, the drug culture and the pop culture found one another and merged. Seemingly overnight, wholesome-looking, all-American young singers began growing their hair to their shoulders, growing beards to their chests, and growing marijuana in their backyards. The words in their songs often seemed combined in some mystic arrangement, and it sometimes seemed necessary for their listeners to be as stoned as they were if the music was to be deciphered. Brian Wilson, the leader of the Beach Boys, took to drugs the way a surfer takes to the bonsai pipeline.
I'd take these drugs and I'd get into weird head bags and real weird, man, heavy acid, far out, let's do it this, I got real freaky mentally, and to the point where, and then I said, what have I done here? I've really goofed, I've really gone crazy, and I went and tossed this thing into the can,
Bryant was tossing much of his music away in those days. He would write songs which his friends told him were lovely, and then tear them up before they were completed. He and the Beach Boys recorded all the background music for one album, but Brian, in a relatively sober state one day, deemed the music too weird and destroyed the tapes.
I mean, drugs ought to be medical, It should be a medicine thing for special cases only, and it should not be a street situation where drugs are available to people on the street. I don't believe that drugs should be available to people on the street because drugs do not have the right effect, desired effects on overall level. When people take drugs, the overall effect is undesirable. Believe me, I know because I have been through it.
Wilson's public relations representative, who sat in on our interview, interrupted at this point to request that the discussion about drugs be stopped. Brian objected. Young people who were listening, he pointed out, should know about the dangers of drugs. They were in part responsible for the decline of the Beach Boys in the late 60s, and that they nearly turned him into a bona fide psycho. And he wanted to relate what had rescued him from drugs.
Transcendental meditation came along when I needed it, and I got a dose of that. I got a little dose of meditation, and it helped me. It helped me to see the light, to see a little light, with the issue, And so I saw that my nervous system didn't have to be all that goofed up, that I didn't have to, to get a high, I could do it naturally. I didn't need the drugs, So let's get on to something else here.
Brian's music is getting on to something else, too. The drug trip may have taken his music in one direction in the 1960s. His discovery of hypnosis and its effect on the mind is taking his music in another direction in the 1970s. That story when this interview continues tomorrow. This is Lou Irwin, Earth News Radio, for Clairol Herbal Essence. Broadcast on February 25th, Track 1. You'd hardly think that hypnosis would be the subject of a rock song. But then you never know what might pop into the mind of Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. You may one day hear a Beach Boys song about hypnosis.
There's a line in one of my songs that says, I'm convinced that the hypnosis of our minds can take us far away. It's just a simple little statement saying, using hypnosis to cultivate a positive attitude.
Brian Wilson, the leader of the group, and the one responsible for writing most of their music, Brian has now discovered hypnosis and has become intrigued with it, in the same way that he was once turned on to surfing. The difference is that Brian never attempted surfing, but he has been undergoing hypnotherapy, and he claims it has changed his life.
Well, it's given me a way to break the shackles down, knock down the shackles, and bust through. You can see with hypnosis what it is. Basically, it's a directive of positive thinking.
And it is obvious, just engaging in casual conversation with Brian, and his nervousness makes it anything but casual. It is obvious that he is preoccupied much of the time just with hurdling all those mental barriers which stood in the way of his functioning normally for so many years. The effort has paid off, if in no other way than the regained respect he has received from his two Beach Boy brothers.
My relationship with Dennis is improved. It has become a little easier to handle. It's not as stressed and strained, and the relationship with my brother Carl has improved immensely. We have some projects that we want to do together, and things are looking up. Things are looking better.
Mike Love, another Beach Boy and a cousin, is in Switzerland studying with the Maharishi. Alan Jardine, the other Beach Boy, lives near Santa Barbara and rarely talks to Brian these days. In an interview with us last year, Jardine expressed fierce resentments about Brian Wilson, claiming that those around him have simply indulged him and that Wilson himself was not mustering the will to assume the leadership of the Beach Boys. When Brian heard about Jardine's comments, he reacted,
Yeah, they were fierce, and that it tends to make you to whip you in shape.
But for Brian Wilson, that is what life is too often about, being whipped into shape. Nevertheless, after 16 years, the Beach Boys are still together. What has kept them united? Well, Brian Wilson will be talking about that when this interview continues later. The Beach Boys' Love You is the title of the soon-to-be-released album by America's most durable pop group. And just as Tony Tennille sings, love has kept them together. That story, as our interview with Brian Wilson continues, after this for Clairol Herbal Essence.
Herbal Essence Mountain girls have hair that's clean and bright. And pretty city girls with Herbal Essence hair have got a real shine day and night. The West Coast girls look sunniest with Herbal Essence care. Just like the island girls, so Herbal Essence fresh, they make me wish that I were there. I wish they all could have Herbal Essence hair. They all could have Herbal
What sets Clairol Herbal Essence girls apart? Clean, naturally fresh hair. Fresh, clean hair is second nature with Clairol Herbal Essence shampoo. With the essence of 16 natural herbs and wildflowers. That's Clairol Herbal Essence hair. Clean, naturally fresh.
I wish they all could have Herbal Essence hair. Herbal Essence, I wish they all could have. Maybe it won't last, but what do we care?
You are listening to the newest music of the Beach Boys.
Might end up in tears then, but what do we care?
They have survived in their original form for 16 years now, longer than any other white rock group. And when you ask the leader of the group, Brian Wilson, what it is that has held the group together for so long, he replies,
The force that's held us together is love. One of the forces is love, just natural love, love of life, love of each other, love of music, you know. Those kind of things have held us together. Interest and desire to please somebody or wanting to please, wanting to be part of the scene.
But for nearly 10 years, Brian Wilson went about pleasing few people, least of all himself, apparently. From 1966 until last year, he dropped out of performing, his place on stage taken by Bruce Johnston. His relationship with the other Beach Boys deteriorated to the point where he rarely talked to them, composing much of his music with Van Dyke Parks. He became heavily involved in drugs, and his eccentricities became the subject of unending rumors and gossip in Hollywood. But last year, due more to pressures from his relatives than from public demand, Brian Wilson began cleaning up his act, as they say, and returned to writing, recording, and performing again. Wilson says that he would like to see a close relationship between himself and the other Beach Boys come about again.
Of course I would, yes. I definitely would like to see that happen.
But you're the one who could achieve that.
I could achieve it. Of course, I could help to achieve this, and, you know, it's something that's done naturally, you know, something that's done very naturally, and that is done through patience. You know, you have to be patient, and, you know, all that.
Because I guess that the other members of the Beach Boys really do want to start creating music together again. I mean, they certainly have been expressing those kinds of feelings, you know, in interviews and the like. And they really would like for there to be a revival of the kind of spirit that existed in the beginning.
Definitely so. But it's happening. It is happening already. Like indications are that the last tour we took was highly indicative of things looking up.
But is Brian Wilson really ready to become the actual leader of the Beach Boys once again? On that issue, he still has some misgivings. Brian Wilson spent a lot of the past 10 years just lying in bed and getting fat. Well, he's out of bed, has taken off a lot of weight, and is back leading the Beach Boys again. Sort of. That story after this for Clairol Herbal Essence.
Herbal Essence Mountain girls.
Things go as scheduled. The Beach Boys will be back with a new album called The Beach Boys Love You. And if that sounds like the title of a 60s album, wait till you hear what's inside. Songs about girls, cars, and good vibrations. Yes, let the word go out. Brian Wilson is back in gear.
Like I say, I had spent 4 years in my bed, you know, or 4 years just out of commission, you know, on my keister, so to speak, and I just, I had told myself, look, I've had enough of whatever, and I just want to express, you know, myself again.
And if the expressions are not new, what matter? The feelings are good, and that is what the Beach Boys were always all about anyway. But inevitably, people will ask, is the music as good as... Pick your own closing word. Perhaps the real question should be, can Brian Wilson reassert his leadership and control over the Beach Boys and those around them once again?
Well, control. I don't really maintain too much control, really, over people as much as I do. I exercise, well, let's see, what do I exercise? I can't, that's hard to say, I really don't know, I think I just exercise a leadership, but not really too much a control.
But leadership does represent kind of determining where the limits are, what you're going to do, and telling people what they ought to do, doesn't it?
Yes, that's true. That's true. I didn't consider that.
Do you feel comfortable these days doing that?
No, I don't. I don't. I actually don't. It's really very much a test on me, and it's very much an uncomfortable situation for me. It's hard work. That's why I say those are things that you just have to do as a man. You have to be a man about it.
He sounds like the football coach at the place where kids sing about being true to their school. Or he sounds like Murray Wilson giving his boys a pep talk before a performance. To Brian Wilson, there is little in life that is spontaneous. In his world, things are done because they ought to be done, because he has a responsibility to do them. Which makes you consider the title of that new album again. Was it made because the Beach Boys love you, or because you love the Beach Boys? This interview with Brian Wilson will conclude later. Remember how the Beach Boys once sang about a surfer girl? Well, their music business, there is an unwritten rule that if you are to remain successful, you must always change. Well, listen to the Beach Boys in 1977. They're honking down the highway again, probably in their little deuce coupe. They don't seem to have changed much at all, but then perhaps that rule is dumb anyhow. And what guru of a rock and roller made it up anyway? Bing Crosby never changed, nor did Frank Sinatra. Even the Supremes went about for years recording what seemed like the same song over and over. But Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys leader, was always conscious of that rule.
Changes sometimes can create or cause fear, and of course, that with me, my personal experience is that change is always very hard for me. It's hard on me, And I tend to take almost an overly bitter attitude about things that happen. I think, well, doggone it, I'm gonna do it. I've learned from people that you just have to tell yourself you can do it. There's no other way. You have to do it that way.
Sounds like life is something to brazen out.
Yes.
Well, she's a roller skating child with a ribbon in her hair.
On the new Beach Boys album is a tune called Roller Skatin' Child. It is a song that evokes a lot of the feelings of the surfing music that Brian Wilson started writing 16 years ago. Of all the songs on the new album, it is the one which gives Brian the greatest satisfaction, he says.
Well, because it will make sweet loving when the sun goes down. We'll even do more when her mama's not around. It's just got that feeling. It's got a feeling of we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. It's got that feeling, that we're gonna do something. And it's got that, inspired feeling, more than most of the tunes that we had done on the album. It's more up than most of them.
Speaks almost to yourself these days. I mean, your own frame of mind, huh?
Yes, it does.
Holding hands, it's so cold like a bird.
Brian says he is happy with the music he has created for the Beach Boys' Loves You album, and so he says are the other members of the group. He calls it
the best single effort that we have done since Pet Sounds days, since back in 1966, for over 10 years, yeah. In 10 years, probably the best effort that we have done.
It was in 1966 that Brian Wilson stopped touring with the Beach Boys and began going through changes.